Most people spend their lives waiting for a sign to tell them who to be. But for one girl, the sign was a light that forced her to choose. This is the story of the light that divides. It began in a hidden grove where a crystal tree stood silent. In the full heat of the day, its branches only glimmered softly, like glass holding onto a secret it wasn't ready to tell. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world turned to gray, the tree finally awakened. This was the moment the girl always returned to the grove. She knew that at dusk, the tree didn't just glow, it split. A thin beam of shimmered light would emerge from the trunk. It was narrow as a single thread and bright as a promise. It cut through the cooling air in front of her like a sharp line drawn between two different worlds. When the girl stepped closer, she realized something strange. The beam didn't warm her skin like a fire. It didn't blind her eyes like the sun. It didn't behave like light at all. It behaved like a decision. She lifted her hand toward the glow, and the beam reacted. It split again. One strand of light bent toward her palm, while the other strand bent away. She froze in the silence of the woods. Light is not supposed to choose directions. Light is not supposed to react to a person. It is not supposed to divide itself around a human being. But the crystal tree was watching her. It had always been watching. She whispered a single question into the dark. She asked what the tree was showing her. The beam trembled in response, as if it were uncertain whether she was truly ready to know the answer. Then the light sharpened. It drew a thin, perfect line across the dirt at her feet. It was a line she could easily step over, or a line she could refuse entirely. It was a boundary that meant something she didn't yet understand. The girl felt her heartbeat rise in her chest. She realized the tree wasn't illuminating a path for her to follow. It was separating one. She knew without knowing how, that once she crossed that line, she would never be the same person again. The weight of that transformation was too much for a child. She stepped back from the thin line of light, not because she was afraid of the dark, but because something deep inside her whispered, "Not yet." The crystal tree did not dim when she retreated. It didn't flicker or withdraw the line. It simply held it there, steady and impossibly straight. It was marking a place in the world the way a finger marks a page in a book. It was a point to return to, a point that waited. The girl felt the weight of that waiting as she walked away. It wasn't a heavy weight, and it wasn't urgent. It was precise. It felt like a seam in the air, a moment that had already happened once before, and was happening again only because she hadn't understood it the first time. She whispered a promise to the trees. She said she would come back. The tree didn't answer, because it didn't need to. The light softened just slightly, acknowledging her words. Then it narrowed further, becoming thinner than a thread until it was almost invisible. But even as she turned away and the shadows of the grove swallowed the last glimmer, she could still feel the line behind her. It wasn't a memory or a warning. It was a tether. It was a place in the world that now belonged to her, and it would not let her forget. As she reached the edge of the grove, the wind shifted. A faint shimmer brushed her shoulder, like a whisper. It was a promise that she would return. She knew with a certainty that made her breath catch that the dividing light wasn't finished with her. It had only marked the beginning of her story. As she walked away, she felt the light behind her the way a child feels a promise they don't yet understand. The crystal tree did not call after her. It did not beg or bend its branches in longing. It simply held the line. The tree did not exist to give. It existed to witness. It was there to mark the exact moment a person becomes someone new. It was there to separate who they were from who they could be. The girl didn't know it yet, but she had already stepped into the part of the story where the tree would not follow her. She would have to return on her own, not because the tree needed her, but because she needed the moment the tree had marked. The light was not a gift. It was a hinge. It was a place where the world had folded so that she could eventually unfold. Years passed after that night. They didn't pass loudly or quickly. They passed the way seasons do when you are not watching them closely. They changed everything while pretending they changed nothing at all. The girl grew. She didn't just grow taller or older. She grew in the way people do when life pushes them forward faster than they want to go. She learned to move because she had to. She learned to leave things behind because she had no other choice. She learned to survive because the world never asked for her permission. But through all those years, the line of light stayed with her. It wasn't a dream, it was a direction. It was a seam in her mind she could not unsee. It was a moment she had not finished living. One day, after too many days of being told where to go and who to be, she felt something inside her shift. It wasn't a break or a snap. It was a quiet, steady click, like a lock turning from the inside. She realized she was no longer the child who had stepped back from the light. She wasn't ready then, but she was someone else now. She had been shaped by leaving and carved by circumstance. She finally understood that choice is not something given to you by the world. Choice is something you take for yourself. So, she returned to the grove. She didn't come running or trembling. She didn't come hoping the tree remembered her. She returned the way a person returns to a truth they have finally grown enough to face. The grove was unchanged. Crystal things always are. The tree stood exactly where she had left it. Its branches shimmered with the same patient glow. Its trunk held the same seam of light, thin as a breath and sharp as a promise. She stepped toward it, not as the girl who whispered not yet, but as the person she had become. She spoke with a voice that no longer wavered. She said she was back, but not as a child. She was there as someone who finally had full choice. The tree did not bow or brighten. It did not answer her. It simply was, and in that stillness, she felt something new. The moment was no longer waiting for her. It was meeting her. She stood before the tree longer than she meant to. She wasn't frozen or afraid. She was simply present. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at the dividing light as something that had happened to her. She was looking at it as something she was finally ready to meet. The seam of light shimmered. It wasn't louder, but it was more there. Her presence seemed to sharpen its edges. Steady breath that felt like it had been waiting years to leave her body. She stepped closer. The ground didn't tremble and the air didn't shift. The crystal tree never reacts. It simply is. And because it is, the moment it holds becomes clearer the closer you come to yourself. She reached the place where the lying had once stopped her, the exact spot where she had hesitated with a child's uncertainty. Now she stood there with a different kind of quiet. It wasn't hesitation or doubt. It was a quiet made of choice. The dividing light lifted slightly, acknowledging the person she had become. But it did not bend to her. It didn't need to. She was the one who had changed. She lowered her hand toward the seam. She wasn't testing it or questioning it. She was greeting it. The light didn't split this time. It didn't pull away or reach toward her. It held its line. It was a boundary, a truth, and a moment waiting to be crossed. She understood finally that the line had never been about readiness. It had been about return. It was about coming back with a self she had chosen, not one shaped by the world. She whispered to the version of herself she had carried all this time. She said, "I am here." The seam brightened, just enough to show it had heard her, but not enough to guide her. The next step was hers alone. She stood before the seam of light, and she didn't feel small. The line hadn't changed, and the tree hadn't changed, but she had. She could feel it in the way her breath settled and her shoulders lowered. Her heartbeat was steady and grounded. She took a chosen step. It was a step that carried years inside it, years of being moved and told who she was. The dividing light clarified everything. It was like standing before a mirror that showed her direction instead of her reflection. She lifted her hand again. Back then, her hand had been asking for permission. Now, her hand was an answer. The light held its line, straight and unwavering. It was a boundary drawn by something older than choice, but completed by it. She felt the truth settle into her bones. The line had always been about this return. She stepped close enough that the seam of light brushed the edge of her fingers. It didn't burn or chill. It didn't push her back. It simply existed, waiting for her to decide. She understood the tree's stillness now. It wasn't indifference or silence. It was respect. The tree would not choose for her. The light would not pull her forward. Choice could only come from her. She closed her eyes to feel the light more clearly. The seam hummed softly, a vibration she felt in her ribs and her breath. It wasn't calling her or promising anything. It was simply there, the way truth is there long before you are ready to speak it. She opened her eyes, and she stepped forward. Not across the line yet, but toward it. She was close enough that the light outlined her face, sketching the person she was becoming. She knew the next step would not be a return, but a crossing. For the first time, she felt no fear. She only felt choice, and when she finally stepped toward the line, the world did not change.